Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Preparing a Successful Capital Budget Request, a webinar presented by the Greater Ohio Policy Center and the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. My name is Jason Warner, and I am excited to host this webinar presentation where we will have the opportunity to learn about the upcoming state capital budget and how your organization or community can access dollars for capital projects. Today's webinar will be presented by myself and Jessica DeLong with the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. First, some housekeeping. We ask all participants to mute your microphones to avoid any unnecessary disruptions and background noise. We also ask that you submit any questions that you might have in the chat box below. We will address all questions that you have at the end of this afternoon's presentation. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website within the next 24 hours in the event you are unable to stay for the full presentation. We have over 125 participants registered for today's session, some of whom will likely miss all or a part of the presentation. So this will help those of you who are unable to participate in the full discussion today. First, a bit about myself. I am honored to serve as the Director of Strategic Engagement with the Greater Ohio Policy Center, Ohio's leading nonpartisan nonprofit organization devoted to the promotion of sustainable growth in Ohio cities and metros. My co-presenter today is Jessica DeLong, Senior Grants Administrator at the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, which oversees capital projects undertaken by the state agencies and state-supported institutions of higher education, manages Ohio's school facilities program, and administers funding for community-based cultural and sports facilities projects. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off today by discussing the legislative process involved in enacting the capital budget and what you can do right now to prepare a successful bid for funding. The capital appropriations budget is typically, though not always, approved by the General Assembly in the second year of the two-year legislative session. We're currently in the first year of the two-year session, which began back in January. Earlier this year, lawmakers approved the state's two-year operating budget. This legislation provides funding for the day-to-day administration of the state and its public agencies. The two-year budget covers all expenses to manage the state of Ohio from July 1st, 2025 through June 30th of 2027. The capital appropriations budget provides funding for projects that repair, reconstruct, and construct capital assets of state agencies other than the Ohio Department of Transportation, colleges, universities, and public schools. Capital assets include buildings, parks, and related facilities, basically anything that you can physically touch or occupy. The reason ODOT is not included is because this separate state transportation budget, which also approved earlier this year, deals with funding of ODOT's capital projects, which are derived from the state motor fuel tax and federal transportation funds. In most years, the capital appropriations budgets also includes funding for local communities for regional projects, which we will discuss more about in a moment. Typically, capital budgets are funded through long-term debt issued by the state in the form of bonds. This is not always the case. Several years ago, the state approved an all-cash capital budget due to an influx of federal resources following the 2020 COVID pandemic. Last year, the capital budget was primarily funded with bonded funds, which represented 92% of all projects that were funded in the capital budget. However, more than $280 million in cash was available to lawmakers to appropriate for projects around the state, 8% of all funding approved in 2024. This was down from what was appropriated in 2022, but a not insignificant amount of funding. All told, lawmakers approved a total of $3.5 billion in spending on capital projects in 2024. So what type of projects did the funding support, particularly the community projects you are likely interested in supporting in your town? Community projects that receive state funds must support the acquisition, construction, and related equipping for projects demonstrating a state benefit for one of 5 categories, including higher education, mental health, parks and recreation, conservation, or cultural or sports facilities. Any project that you are seeking to fund in your community must fit into one of these categories, with most likely falling into either the parks or recreation or cultural and sports facilities categories, the latter being something of a catch-all category that it can apply to anything from a local museum or historical structure that is accessible to the general public to some of the larger facilities we have in our state, such as sports stadiums for our professional sports teams. As long as the facilities are publicly available and not restricted to the general public, they will typically qualify for capital budget funds. However, Jessica will discuss more about the do's and don'ts for this later in today's presentation. What the capital budget cannot support is operational expenses. Capital funds cannot pay for staff who work at these facilities, nor can they be used for any other costs other than physical construction or maintenance or equipment that will support these facilities. A basic rule of thumb is if you can physically touch it, it is probably covered by the capital budget. Operating funds must be generated either locally or through the state operating budget, which was approved earlier this year. Now, the process of enacting the capital budget plays out largely behind the scenes at the State House. It moves much faster than the process of enacting the operating budget, which is often being completed in mere weeks rather than months. Generally, but not always, the capital budget is passed with unanimous support from members of both parties who are able to fund projects in their district. The enactment of the capital budget occurs within the context of the preparation of the state's 6-year capital improvement plan, which is updated biannually by the Office of Budget and Management based on recommendations from state agencies. While it is anticipated that the process will formally kick off in January of next year, there are already things that you can be doing to help secure funding in the budget when it passes next year. Step 1 is pretty simple. Identify projects in the community that would benefit from capital budget funds. This can be anything from a splash pad at the local park or town square to a historic building renovation like a 100-year-old vaudeville theater. Next is to identify who the project sponsor is. A project sponsor can be a public or private entity, but must be an organization that is in good standing with the state. Determine how much funds you need for the project, and remember, project funds can only support capitalization costs incurred from the construction or purchase of long-term fixed assets that produce long-term state and economic benefits. Though not necessarily needed, local funding for the project is important as it demonstrates community investment and support. And another good rule of thumb when considering this final point is that legislators, whenever they're looking to fund a project, are looking for the state funds to be the last dollars in on the project. You want to make certain that any local funds that you have that are going to be supporting this project are already firmly committed, and the request that you're making of the state is for the bare minimum of expenses that you need in order to get the project complete. Now, step 2 is to submit the request for project funds to members of the Ohio House and or the Ohio Senate. The more information about the project that can be shared with lawmakers, the better. These are some of the steps that you want to be taking right now. Inviting the lawmakers to the project site so that they can see firsthand the vision for the project and understand the importance of the investment to the community. Another step that you want to be engaging in right now that's not listed here on the screen is considering coordinating on the project, particularly regional coordination. Many areas of the state prefer to prioritize projects for funding requests that are critical community or economic importance to the city, county, or region. Organizations like the state's 7 Jobs Ohio affiliates request communities and organizations in their footprint to submit requests for capital budget projects that they will then submit as a regional priority. This is a good way to build support for a project in your community by attaining the support of, say, One Columbus here in Central Ohio or Team NEO in Northeast Ohio. But you should also plan to submit your requests directly to lawmakers as well, in the event that the project is not prioritized by these municipal, county, or regional entities. Step 3 is when members of the House and Senate submit requests for their districts to the finance chairman of their respective chambers. Leadership will then review requests and finalize recommendations, developing the capital budget plan. The budget is introduced in the legislature and passed in a matter of weeks, if not days, generally with little debate or opposition. The committee process will move quickly as soon as the budget is introduced, usually within a single hearing, with little advance notice and limited opportunity to testify. That is why, while this is happening, it is important to stay in constant contact with your representatives to remind them of the importance of the project that you are seeking funding for. You don't want your members to forget about the importance of the project and to not prioritize the funding requests when they are meeting with the powers that be when decisions are being made about what will or will not get funded. Once the budget is approved by the General Assembly, we move on to step 4, when the budget is signed by the governor. The budget will become effective 90 days after the legislation is signed. Project sponsors who receive specific allocations in the budget will work with appropriating agencies to ensure that the project meets all of the state's legal requirements and execute a legal agreement. So what exactly is an appropriating state agency? When the budget passes and your project is funded, you won't get a check in the mail. You will have to work with one of these 22 state agencies who had capital funding directed to them in the previous capital budget, or others that are not listed here. We'll be hearing from the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission momentarily, but one of these groups will have funding in the budget directed to them to support capital projects through their agency. And these funds will come from one of these funding groups. Cash is typically directed in the state operating budget to one of these funds, which are then appropriated in the capital budget to support capital projects. Some of these are supported by user fees or contributions from members of the public when they say buy a specialty license plate or check a box on their tax return, while others are from state general revenue funds. Bonded funds are revenue secured from the sale of bonds by the state. Bonds must be authorized by Ohio voters, and the proceeds from the bond sales must be directed specifically to the funds for which they are created, such as the Cultural and Sports Facilities Building Fund or the Clean Ohio Trail Fund. Projects supported by these bonds must fit the criteria of the bonded program. So as an example, your movie theater renovation will not be getting money from the Adult Correctional Building Fund, which is reserved for the state's correctional facilities. Once the agreement is executed, the information is submitted to the Office of Budget and Management for review prior to being submitted to the State Controlling Board, the agency director, for approval. Once approved, the project sponsor can submit payment requests to the state agency for reimbursement of expenses covered by the approved funds. Now, one final word on the budget process. What happens when your project is not finished within the confines of the 2-year budget process? Does the money go away? Do you need to start the budget process all over again? Yes, but also no. Each budget includes what is called appropriations as well as reappropriations. Reappropriations are when funds that were previously appropriated in a past budget are reauthorized for another 2 years. This happens quite a bit due to the nature of capital construction projects. Weather delays, labor disputes, increasing costs, or supply issues can delay projects. Lawmakers recognize this and work with appropriating state agencies and local officials to make sure that projects that have received funds continue to receive those funds until the project is completed. This is why, even after a project is funded, it is best to stay in constant contact with your lawmakers to keep them appraised of project progress and hope that they remain supportive of the work that you are doing. Now, it's important to try to avoid the need to go to the reappropriations process whenever possible. Again, recognizing that some delays are completely unavoidable. Lawmakers like to fund projects in the capital budget because they like to be able to participate in ribbon cutting ceremonies. And the longer that those are delayed, the longer they have the opportunity to promote the work that they have done to help to secure this project's completion. So it's always best to try to avoid the need to have to go towards the reappropriations budget, but recognize that in the event that it's necessary, you're not going to immediately lose those funds because your project was not completed within that 2-year context of the capital budget time. So with that, here is my contact information. If you wish to follow up with any specific questions after today's presentation, I'm happy to provide any more information or details that you might need. For now, however, I'm going to turn things over to Jessica at OFCC. Jessica DeLong is the Senior Grants Administrator for the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Ohio State University and has served the state of Ohio for the past 13 years. Jessica is going to speak about what happens after your organization is successful in obtaining capital budget dollars. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Jason, and go Bucks. So as mentioned, Jessica DeLong, and I am going to specifically talk about if you receive an appropriation for a cultural facility, you're going to seek approval with OFCC here. If your appropriation lands with another agency, there's most likely still some sort of form that you're going to have to fill out with them, but every agency is going to act differently. So it's always best just to contact them when you do see your name in that capital bill. But there's always going to be some sort of review process for your project. I believe all agencies have some sort of similar reimbursement process. Again, best to contact them to find out, but it's always good to point out, as Jason mentioned earlier, that we don't just show up on your doorstep with a giant check and then you cash it and do what you want. So based on my experience, I have had a lot of people that are new to this that contact me and do expect me to send them a check. So there is just one more hoop of fire to jump through once you do receive that appropriation. I do enjoy doing these webinars because it does allow me to guide folks before they come to OFCC to seek approval. I know for first timers it can be a little intimidating, but rest assured it's not. I feel like the hardest part is actually getting that appropriation in the capital bill. And so once you come through OFCC, I feel like it's a fairly painless process. You just need to produce some documentation that we're going to talk about here in a second. And of course, I'm here to help you guys the entire way. So never hesitate to reach out with questions. Next slide, please. Some of my slides, I'm going to repeat some of the items that Jason already covered. So I won't spend as much time on some of these talking points. But again, I just encourage folks to contact both state reps and senators. So the more people you have backing your project, the better. And we basically, when the capital bill is signed, we get a list of all the projects that are under OFCC, and those are just an appropriation at that point. That doesn't mean your project has been approved. So that's why we say it's just a potential project. So you still have to come through us to submit your budget and everything to make sure that these, it's an eligible project that we can reimburse for. So OFCC will work with the local project sponsor, also known as the grantee, and those are local government entities, villages, townships, cities, and also the nonprofit organization. Next slide, please. Just some background information here. The most recent capital bill back in 2024, OFCC received $143 million in community projects. These are, Jason mentioned before, the other agencies that receive community project funding as well. Some of the projects that were in that bill, I just want to briefly mention here. The top left, we have the Garfield Memorial, James A. Garfield Memorial, I should say. That was $300,000 for interior restorations, and that is located in the Lakeview Cemetery up in Cleveland. Bottom left picture there, we have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, also in Cleveland. And this was actually a reappropriation for 1.75 million. This was they're actually in construction now, creating an art park, which is located between the Rock Hall and the Great Lakes Science Center. So that's going to be a cool spot for everybody to enjoy once completed, I believe, next year. And then on the right there, we have the Cincinnati Music Hall, which is located in the Over the Rhine district down there in Cincinnati. That was a $1 million roof replacement project. Next slide, please. Because these are tax exempt bonds, there are certain items that we can and cannot pay for, which I'm going to go over here shortly. But just in general background information, we need to make sure that these projects are supporting culture over the term of the bonds, which is 10 years. The project sponsor, when you're ready to submit your project, you're going to complete that submittal form, which is going to be an online version at that point. We're working on creating that now. But you'll contact us and we're going to send you a link that specifically takes you to your project submittal form. And then this picture here is actually a current project. It's, I believe I received this photo maybe last month. And this is the Shays Theater in Ashtabula. And they received $500,000 for renovations to this theater. I believe it's been closed for quite some time, so it's a complete rehab. This is the lobby area, but this is going to be a great community center for this area here. So that's going to be exciting for them when this is complete, I believe at the end of this year. Next slide, please. So what is culture? So this is the heart of our program, and we live by the Ohio Revised Code 123.28, which defines culture as visual, musical, dramatic, and other arts. So that's going to be pretty much your theaters, your amphitheaters, opera houses, movie theaters, so on and so forth. You also have the presentation of principles of science, industry, history, heritage, and uses of arts, so your museums in Ohio. We would like to also see it fall under the category, if necessary, the presentation, preservation of historic interests in a state or local historical facility. So this is going to be a lot of your smaller areas that have historical societies and an older home or building that, sort of highlight the history of that area. We also work with a lot of places that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So that side note would trigger an extra step where you would work with the folks at the State Historic Preservation Office. You would submit some information to them, and we rely on their expertise to make sure that you're doing the correct work on the building to maintain the historic integrity of that facility, and also make sure you're not going to get delisted for doing something wrong. Also, we work with a lot of veterans memorials, and that would also fit under the category of historical interest. But the main thing that we're looking for, we want your project to fit under one of these bullet points here, but we also want to see that the facility's predominant purpose is to provide culture to the public. Next slide, please. Some of the requirements for our grant here at OFCC. So there is a local match requirement, and that is $1 to every 2 state dollars. So basically always half of your appropriation that you receive. So for example, obviously, if you receive a $100,000 appropriation, your local match is going to be $50,000. So, we would just need to see that with some fundraising, other grants received that are not state grants, pledges. If you own your building, you can use the value of your facility as the match, which is really nice. Before we approve, we also need to see that the project's fully funded. So again, for example, you receive a $100,000 appropriation. You send me a budget that's $200,000. I just need to see where that extra $100,000 is coming from before we can approve the project. And that's to make sure that, we're the last dollar in the project, and that, I want to hand over that last dollar to that building is open to the public and providing culture. We do work with a lot of facilities that do have a lease, not an issue. We just need to see that that lease has a 10-year term from the point where the project is complete. So that's one thing we look for in the lease, and you'll send us a copy of that. That triggers an extra agreement to be signed with us, which is the non-disturbance and estoppel agreement. That's signed with the grantee, OFCC, and then the landlord. Not listed on here, but super important, prevailing wage. Not everybody's favorite subject, but it is a part of these grants. So every piece and part of the scope of work that we're defining for our project with you. So for example, if you're replacing your HVAC system, you're replacing your sidewalks out front, you're replacing windows, every single contractor that you hire for your project needs to make sure they're paying their guys prevailing wage. And I know the renovation threshold right now is $75,000, so that would trigger the requirement for prevailing wage. And then I think a new build is still at $250,000. And then we also have an insurance requirement. You just need to send us a current copy of your property and liability insurance. So again, nothing too serious, just a bunch of paperwork that you have to fill out with us in order for us to be able to recommend the project for approval. Next slide, please. So every project is different. There might be additional information that we require from you, but we're going to work with you the entire way. We're going to make it as easy as possible. So bear with us if we do ask for some additional items. Every project sponsor or grantee is going to sign a cooperative use agreement with us. And I would say in a nutshell, that agreement says you agree to provide culture to the public for 10 years. Again, the term of the bonds that funds these grants. And I know Jason touched on this before, but these grants go before the controlling board. So once we're ready to recommend the project for approval, we send that a legal agreement to you for signature. We get that back. We then initiate internally the step for you to get that money approved and released from the controlling board. Again, a reimbursement grant. So once we have full approval, we can start the reimbursement process. We cannot pay for any down payments. So Joe Schmo contractor wants 50% down to get started. That would to be the responsibility of the project sponsor. We can only pay for work that's been completed or materials that have been delivered. Another nice thing about our reimbursement process is that we don't need to see that the invoice has been paid, just for, again, work completed, materials delivered. And then once you get that invoice turned into me, we usually get that money turned around via electronic funds transfer within 2 weeks. So that gives you plenty of time to pay your contractors. Next slide, please. Some of the items eligible for reimbursement, very broad list here. The most important thing that I do is you send me a copy of your budget on a construction professional's letterhead. I'm going to comb through that, make sure you have enough eligible items that we can pay for. So, you're going to be working with me on a more detailed list than this, but in general, we can pay for acquisition of property. We're going to pay for bricks and mortar. Obviously, we're a construction agency here, so we want to see a majority of the funds go towards that. We can pay for some soft costs with your architectural engineering fees. We normally cover up to 10% of your budget to cover those fees, because again, we want a majority of the funds to be for construction. We can also pay for machinery, part of the structure, computer systems, equipment, furnishings necessary for the function of the facility. And then some ineligible items, we typically stay away from things like tuck pointing, which is just filling in kind of holes in the brick. Any sort of masonry crack repairing we would avoid. Painting interior, exterior, unless it's new construction. So if you're inside rehabbing a home and you're adding new drywall, new plaster, we can pay to paint that. Or if you're adding new siding to the outside of a building, we can paint that siding. But if you're just going and slapping a new coat on something, then that would not be eligible. Same with like plaster repair, window repair, roof repair. There is a fine line, I always say, between restoration and repair with the state. So it's just best that, we kind of work together and kind of comb through and make sure that it is indeed restoration and we can pay for it. Next slide, please. So if you'd like more information about the grant review process, you can check out our website at ofcc.ohio.gov, and Ohio is spelled out. There's a few videos on there that you can watch and additional literature to learn more about the program and about OFCC as well. Next slide. I just wanted to take a few moments to highlight some of the projects that we've either approved this year or have been completed recently. And the first one is the American Sign Museum, which is located in the Camp Washington area down in Cincinnati, if anybody's familiar with that area. This was a $750,000 grant to renovate the adjacent 20,000 square foot building into additional exhibit space. This museum was opened in 2005, and it covers over 100 years worth of American sign history. Very unique museum, very awesome. I highly recommend checking this place out if you're down in the Cincinnati area. Next slide, please. Also, probably maybe a month ago, I was able to go down to Marietta, down south along the river there, and visit the Castle Museum. And they were recently approved in August for a grant of $130,000 for roof and gutter replacement, along with the restoration of the cupola on the carriage house, which is that photo on the left there. So the Castle is a Victorian house museum that offers tours of a 1855 Gothic revival style home and has been operating as a museum since 1994. Next slide. And lastly, I wanted to give Columbus a little love and showcase a recent project that was completed at Shadowbox Live, which is down in the Brewery District, south of downtown here in Columbus. This was a $200,000 grant to renovate the upfront area, which if anybody's been in this facility, they had a giant bar sort of in the lobby receiving area, and they tore that out. They added a larger stage. They updated the green rooms, added a new restroom entrance and other items. And Shadowbox is the nation's largest resident theater ensemble, and they offer incredible sketch comedy, musicals, so much more. There's something for everybody there. Again, recommend this place as well. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. I know we probably got some questions waiting for us here.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And if everyone will bear with me a moment, I am going to close out our presentation here for just a moment. And we'll go to Q&A, which I see we have at least one item in the chat at the moment. Maybe I don't. Let's see. Yes, we do have a question in the chat. Jennifer would like to know, how often do projects approved by the legislature fail in the subsequent stages of approval, and for what kind of reasons? Jessica, that might be a question for you. Have there been any instances where there has been an appropriation made that you've then gone through the process of working out the agreement that you weren't able to actually get that agreement executed?
Yeah, so there's occasionally a project that is appropriated and assigned to OFCC that we can't administer because it doesn't fit under that definition of culture. So, for example, there was a township community park, and they came to us, submitted their information, and they wanted to purchase new playground equipment, and playground equipment doesn't fit any of those items under the definition of culture that I went over earlier. So we are trying at this point to get them transferred to somebody like the Department of Natural Resources that would be able to administer a grant like that. There's also been other situations where somebody came to us and they already did their project and they didn't pay prevailing wage. So that would automatically that's a big red flag there, and we wouldn't be able to approve the project. So they either go back and pay their guys prevailing wage, or they just do a whole new project with us. But we usually, 9 times out of 10, we're able to work through it and, make it work for people. But if it doesn't fit under that definition of culture, then there's not much we could do.
So the next question that we have here from Lee is, for building renovations, the building does not have to be owned by the local municipality requesting funds. Is that correct?
Correct. It could have a lease. As long as the person that's occupying the building is a governmental entity or a nonprofit. But if it's owned by Mike Smith, then that's fine with us. Again, they have to have that 10-year lease agreement in place as well.
The next question we have from Laura is, for a historic building, would lead paint abatement be covered for use of capital budget funds?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I would say yes, but then going ahead and repainting might be the bigger question. But any sort of lead paint, getting rid of asbestos, things like that, even having someone go in there and check all that out, we could pay for that too. But again, the repainting might be the questionable item, but I'm sure we can find other things to pay for.
Okay, the next question I think is for me. Would you please outline the timeline again between contacting legislators for a project idea, completing legislators' application, and state budget facility approval process? So what I do want to state right off the bat is that for a actual timeline, we don't yet know when the legislature is going to officially begin the capital budget process for 2026. We know it's likely going to happen, and we know that it's probably going to be taking place within the first 6 months of next year, though that, again, is not written in stone. This is more conjecture just based on what the legislature has done in the past several years. But that is going to kick off basically, let's just kind of call it the first quarter of calendar year 2026 is when they're going to be kicking off that process. Now is the time that you should be contacting your lawmakers about specific project requests that you might have in your community and that are in their districts. Jessica and I were actually chatting before we kicked off the webinar this afternoon. And we both sort of agreed that a good rule of thumb would be for you to get your requests in, start the process now, kind of get those initial requests into lawmakers for requests, probably by Thanksgiving. We're anticipating that we might get actual guidance from lawmakers' offices at or around that time. I think that 2 years ago, for that capital budget process that was approved in 2024, we got the initial guidance around December 1st is when the offices told us kind of what they're looking for, what they need, some details that you want to make sure that you are providing to lawmakers. In the past, they have looked for basic things like project name, description, purpose of the overall project, physical location of where it's going to be, the legal name of the organization that's going to be the project sponsor, identification of the facility and assets owned during construction and after the work is completed, estimated total project cost, including an itemized breakdown of those costs over the next 3 years, amount of state funding being requested for the capital biennium, amount and sources of non-state funding, including private, not-for-profit, local, and federal funds supporting the project, the amount of sources of state funding for the project or assets has received in the past, and a good description of what exactly the public benefit of that project is. That's all the information that you're going to want to get to lawmakers when you're making that request. The process itself is largely played out behind the scenes. Lawmakers are going to get those requests. The House and the Senate typically agree ahead of time how much they're going to have to divvy out to communities within their districts. They typically split it 50-50, half in the House, half in the Senate. They will collect those requests from folks in their communities, decide priorities, what projects they want to get, bearing in mind that, it's the majority in the legislature is typically rural, not big city. So you're probably going to see more projects that are going to go to those communities. But that's not to say that larger counties are not going to get projects. As Jessica showed, she had a lot of good examples of projects that are in Ohio's urban areas that did receive project funds. Those will then be decided by leadership in the House and the Senate behind closed doors. The formal capital budget will be introduced, probably going to start in the House. The House and Senate will pass both bills. It'll then go on to the governor, and it's at that point that you will find out for sure that your project was funded, and the process gets turned over to Jessica at OFCC and others who will then begin the process of executing those formal agreements.
And Jason, just to add to that, I mean, you might know more than me, but from what I've heard, there's no standard form across the board for all the legislators. I feel like they all kind of work differently in how you would submit to them. So I think it's just the best maybe start off with calling their aide to see if there maybe is a application, quote unquote, for that, or if it's just a matter of you sending a letter into them requesting with all the things you just mentioned. But I always tell people to sort of, talk up their project quite a bit, and especially let them know how it's going to improve the community, possibly bring dollars into that community as well. And I think it's also important to note that you plan on having that project done within 2 years, because I know you'd mentioned that in your presentation, but I think that's just good to put that out there, that this isn't just an idea on a cocktail napkin. It's a legit project that's been thought out and you're ready to roll with it.
That's great, and that's actually a perfect example right there, Jessica, that you raised there at the end. Every office is going to function differently. Some offices are going to request an actual form that they're going to have that they're going to ask you to provide all of this information on. Others, it's just a simple email or even a conversation that you might have with the legislator. Having worked in a legislative office previously, I can actually affirm the fact that I did once receive a request that was written on a napkin that we did submit, and I do believe that it was funded, but that's how it originally came to us, believe it or not.
That's great. I love
that. So let's see. We do have some other questions that are here in the chat. Where can we find info about non-OFCC related projects that have received grants? Or did the vast majority of those go through OFCC? We're very fortunate we have OFCC here with us today. They've been partnered with us on a number of these webinars over the last few years. I think a vast majority of probably your community projects are probably going to be going through OFCC. That said, there are some that would probably fall within the purview of an organization. For instance, if you're working on a trail project, that would likely fall under the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. They, I'm sure, have information on their website that you can obtain information from, and we'll be happy to kind of gather some of that information and share that with you in a follow-up email that we're going to be sending up after this presentation is over with today. Each agency is going to have additional information on how you would go about executing those agreements once the capital budget is finalized through their agencies. The next question that we have, can park projects be considered improving culture if the requested project is brick and mortar? Jessica, I'll throw that to you.
So we've done projects in parks before, but It's something along the lines of they built a stage, even if it's just a simple stage, no electricity, no lighting, but it's a concrete stage. Somebody can get up there and perform some music, poetry, performing arts, things like that. So again, it has to meet that definition of culture somehow. Even if you're doing a gazebo in a park, because the main use for that gazebo is going to be, a music in the park kind of theme. Or we've also done something where it was sort of a movie night in a park, and they built like a structure, and we pay for the structure, the projection screen, the projector, so on and so forth. That's really the only couple examples I can think of, though.
Great. Well, we don't have any other questions that are currently coming through in the chat. I'm going to go, oh, we did just get one more that was submitted here. Is there a project cost level that is considered too high or too small for this program? Jessica, I'll throw this to you first. What would you say is probably the largest appropriation that you've seen come through OFCC?
So I don't like using this example, but the true largest was $30 million for the Guardians renovations. We had 20 million for the Crew Stadium, 20 for FC Cincinnati, but those are obviously just sports facility projects that we don't get a lot of. A non-sports, I think the highest was the Pro Football Hall of Fame for 10 million. But I would say an average, we get a couple $1 million ones here and there. Those are going to be in the bigger cities like the Music Hall or, the Rock Hall in Cleveland. I would say the average amount is between 100 to 500,000 maybe. There are some smaller dollar amounts, depending on the size of the organization and the needs. But the smallest grant amount I've ever seen is $5,000. But you also have to keep in mind when you are requesting your funding that local match component. So can you come up with that 50% match that you need? So always remember that. And then a lot of people too, when they do request a dollar amount, and then sometimes it gets shaved in the process, and you request $500,000 and then you get 250. So that happens a lot.
Excellent point. Yeah, I think that, as I've gone through in the past, the Legislative Service Commission, which is a great resource if you're ever looking for past information about projects that have previously been funded, they have on their website, the Ohio Budget kind of center, and they have all of the previous documents that are on there, and you can actually see every single community project by county that has been funded. And yeah, I think I've seen them for as low as $5,000 to $10,000 for projects. Again, because what the legislature is going to be looking for is those last dollars in to fund the project. You're going to want to try to get as much of the funding as you can at the local level, so that basically what you're asking for in the capital budget is going to be just that final percentage that you need in order to complete the project. That said, it's also not unheard of for this capital budget to be sort of the first money in. I've seen a past couple of budgets where there have been projects that have sort of popped up that weren't really all that publicly known, that suddenly there was an appropriation that showed up for that project within the context of the capital budget. Those are sort of the seed dollars for that project. They don't necessarily get carried over in a reappropriations budget if the project doesn't come to fruition. But it's not unheard of for this to be an opportunity for first dollars, but they do prefer it to be last dollars. A couple of other questions that we've had come through here. Could this fund a local soccer complex?
So not through us unless it's a professional or semi-professional soccer team, because we have to have a lease in place with that team. So if you're just looking for local kids sports, I think that maybe ODNR, Jason, I would think that would be something they might do. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I think DNR would probably be the most logical choice there. There could be other agencies that they might decide that as an appropriate appropriation. It's also possible you could partner on a project like that with a local parks district, school district, or if you have an other sort of anchor institution that is near your community. For instance, you might have a college or university that you could partner on a project with, and something like that might be able to flow through the Ohio Department of Higher Ed, for instance. So there's a couple of different creative ways that you could get with a project like that. But it is possible, and it's certainly
Mhm.
always worth having a conversation with your legislator about a project like that. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Next question. You mentioned that the building be used as a local project match.
Yes.
Mhm.
So again, if you own that facility, you can use the value of that building as your match. We don't need to see that you go out and get an appraisal on your building if you don't already have one, because that's expensive. You can usually go to the county auditor's website and just type in your property address and it pulls up the current value, and you can just send us a screenshot of that. Or we're also requesting a copy of your property insurance, so that's also going to list the value of your building as well.
And I think we've got one other question here that I think is directed towards you, Jessica. Would construction of a community center for a community that lacks community space be considered under cultural facilities?
So we do work with some community centers, either renovations, adding to, or building, but we're not talking about adding a gym or anything like that or weight rooms. It has to be a community center that's, again, fitting somehow into that definition of culture, whether you're having musical events in there, you're having kids come in and perform, or you're having art classes or any sort of art, performing arts sort of classes where anyone can go in there and learn. So there are different options to put into a community center. So yes.
I'm actually going to go ahead and follow up on that question, Jessica, if you could provide a little bit more information on this. Would you say that OFCC is more involved in renovation of spaces that are going to be utilized for community gathering spaces, or have you ever been involved in any new build projects?
For community centers,
Correct.
um, there might have been one or two new builds. I know we're currently working on one up north for a Polish organization. They're building a community center there. But for the most part, it's either renovating a space they already have or taking an old building and renovating into a center for the community.
Another question here, could land value be used or considered as local match?
Yes, we would consider that. Good question.
And we had another question that came up here, which I also saw was answered in the chat, but I'm just going to go ahead and state this for the benefit of the audience. The question was, this is a reimbursement program only. That is correct. Whenever you're working with a state agency on funding for the capital budget, it is always going to be operating as a reimbursement program. That's why they're going to be looking for that local funding to help to support the project. You're going to want to make sure that you can pay for those expenses on your own, and then be able to be reimbursed by the state as that project progresses. Like we said at the offset, you're not going to get a check in the mail one day just as soon as the capital budget is signed by the governor. There's not going to be the big cardboard check presentation that's going to be taking place. There is a process that's involved in getting all of this done and executed, and you will have to submit receipts to the state agency that you're working with in order to be reimbursed. Another question we had come through: if awarded, can architectural costs be reimbursed? I'm sorry. If awarded, can architectural costs we've already incurred be reimbursed?
Yes, so we can reimburse for costs already incurred. We do have a typical look back period of 18 months prior to us approving the grant. there's exceptions for everything, but that's normally the guidelines that we go by. But yes, that is an option.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and call this our final question we have come through. Would the construction of a fire station qualify? Yes, it would not be a project, I think, that would fall under the purview of the Facilities Construction Commission. However, one of the groups, if you recall earlier in the presentation, we had the list of those state appropriating agencies. One of those included the state fire marshal. That would likely be the entity that funding would go through, the state fire marshal's office, which is a division of the Ohio Department of Commerce. They help to support a lot of fire station projects around the state, both renovations, expansions, or new build. Again, they're going to be looking for local funding to help to support that project. If you have a levy campaign or some other source of local revenue that's helping to pay for that project, that yes, the capital budget would be an opportunity for you to get state support for the construction of a fire station. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and throw this one more question in here, Jessica, for you. Can a project sponsor submit applications for two or more distinct, maybe both of us, submit applications for two or more distinct projects at one time? I think that would be more than fine. If you have a couple of projects that you're looking for, to get undertaken in your community, certainly it would not be forbidden. The only thing I would say is you're not necessarily going to get both of those projects funded. There are 99 House districts, of which, this breaks down into 33 Senate districts. There's a finite amount of money that they're going to have available in the capital budget. And so it would be best for you to prioritize which of those projects you would like to see go to completion first. If you're further along on a project, if say it is 90% funded at the local level and you just need 10%, you might prioritize that as opposed to your project that is say 75% locally funded and you'd be looking for a 25% match. But it's not unheard of for you to submit those two project applications in, but it would be best for you to try to prioritize that.
But if it's two projects at one facility, then yes, that would be okay. But if it's two separate buildings, and that, it might be a little more difficult.
All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up our presentation for today. So I want to go ahead and toggle back over here one last time because we have our contact information that is here on this final slide. So, invite you, if you have any additional questions, to reach out to either me or Jessica. We have the websites for both Greater Ohio and OFCC to follow up with any additional information. This webinar has been recorded, and we are going to be posting it within the next 24 hours on our Greater Ohio website. We've got an entire page with our past webinars that this will be uploaded to. And because you did register for this webinar, we are going to send you a follow-up email that will include a link to the full video presentation, as well as links to some of the other resources that we have discussed throughout the course of this webinar this afternoon. So once again, we thank you for joining us today, and good luck as the capital budget process kicks off, and hopefully you will see your projects and your communities get funded in the next 2 years. So thank you very much again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.